Okay, so you want to dive into human evolution today. We've got a ton of research here, articles, journals, even some stuff about meat and culture. Looks like the goal is to see the whole picture, huh? From the very beginning to what makes us, us.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating is how it all links together. Like a tiny change millions of years ago can still be affecting us now. Diet, social stuff, it all matters.
Right, like a ripple effect, yeah. So, got to start at the beginning. Bipedalism. Some of these sources point to Sahelanthropus, or maybe Orion, something like 6–7 million years back. Could be the last shared ancestor with chimps and gorillas.
Makes you think, what makes us hominin at all?
Yeah.
Bipedalism is huge, but it's not just standing up, right? It's a complete change in the skeleton. Pelvis, spine, feet, even the skull had to adapt.
And talk about trade-offs. Wider pelvis, bigger brain. But childbirth gets a lot harder, something we're still dealing with.
Exactly, wider pelvis for that bigger brain. And that leads us to tool use. Homo habilis comes along around 2.8 million years ago. That's where we see definite tools. Oldowan tools, pretty basic, but a big jump.
See, this is what I find so cool. Homo habilis, still a chimp-sized brain, basically. So those tools mean something big is changing mentally. Oh, and then there's that self-domestication idea, that Ardipithecus ramidus was less aggressive, more like bonobos, like we're the friendly ape that just happened to get smart.
Now that's an intriguing theory. And then bring meat into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
The expensive tissue hypothesis, right? Meat's dense energy means smaller guts, frees up resources for a bigger, more complex brain.
Some of this research says it wasn't so simple, though. Like maybe it was fire, cooking, or even just how early humans worked together to find food, that social aspect, giving us the energy for bigger brains.
Yeah, probably a mix of things, for sure. But even if meat wasn't the only reason, maybe our ancestors depending on it, it created this meat craving. That still affects us today. Something to consider.
Okay, let's talk hunting then. Shearing, social brains. How did meat affect how we evolved socially?
Imagine trying to take down a huge animal alone. Not easy. You need a group to hunt big prey. And sharing what you catch, it lowers the risk for everyone. Makes you depend on each other, makes those social bonds stronger.
But then, didn't that lead to the whole man the hunter thing? Like meat is why males became dominant. What about women's roles in all this?
Important point. The man-the-hunter idea, it's been challenged a lot. Plenty of evidence suggests women were gathering, scavenging, even hunting smaller animals. It's way more complicated than we used to think.
And then some sources talk about the social brain hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
That our intelligence is as much for dealing with other people as it is for surviving in the wild.
Right. Think about it. Living in groups, cooperation, competition, deception, alliances, that takes serious brain power to navigate.
Okay, but meat isn't just about eating, is it? It's got this whole symbolic side. Rituals, feasts, gatherings. It's a way to show status, who you are, even power.
Absolutely. Throughout history, meat's been used to create and reinforce those social hierarchies. The Assyrian Empire, for example. Fancy meat dishes, only for the elite. Or archaic funeral practices. Cattle remains associated with high-status individuals. It's fascinating.
And we still see those patterns today.
Hmm.
Meat can represent wealth, masculinity, national identity even, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The way we produce it, consume it, even just talk about meat, it's loaded with cultural meaning.
Okay, here's one I didn't expect. Humans and canites, co-evolving. The idea that dogs weren't just domesticated, but actually evolved alongside us. That's wild.
The timeline is what gets me. Dogs show up in archaeological records before domesticated livestock. We could be talking a relationship going back 135,000 years, maybe more.
So it was mutually beneficial then. What did each side get out of this ancient partnership?
Well, think about it. Wolves getting scraps and protection from humans. Humans getting these amazing hunting partners and companions. Sounds like a win-win to me.
Some sources even suggest that dogs, that they made us more cooperative. The lupication hypothesis, that we picked up wolf-like social behavior. Now that's a thought.
Definitely makes you question how human social behavior developed. Did our canine buddies teach us a thing or two about cooperation, about pack dynamics? It's definitely something to chew on.
So we've been on this journey through, like, millions of years of human evolution. But let's zoom in on our own species for a bit. The out-of-Africa theory, right? That modern humans, we all started in Africa and then spread out across the globe.
And that's where the evidence from mitochondrial DNA comes in. It backs up that idea of an African origin. But that whole Eve thing, the one woman we're all descended from, it's definitely up for debate.
So it's not as straightforward as saying we all came from one woman.
Not really. Mitochondrial DNA, it points to a common ancestor, sure, but more likely a small group, not just one individual. Plus, it gets even more complex when you think about interbreeding with other hominins, Neanderthals,
Oh,
Denisovans.
wait, we have Neanderthal DNA. No kidding.
Yeah, it just shows you how complex, how messy human evolution really was. It wasn't just a straight line from one species to the next. Branches, overlaps, mixing.
Makes you wonder what else is hiding in our DNA, waiting
Yeah.
to be discovered. But you mentioned something earlier that caught my ear. You said human evolution didn't just stop with Homo sapiens. We're still evolving now.
All the time. Constantly adapting to new stuff, new environments.
I always thought evolution took, like, forever. Millions of years. How can it happen so quickly?
Think about all the pressures we've got. New diseases popping up, changes in what we eat, even cultural shifts.
Yeah.
They all play a part in what traits help us survive, help us reproduce. Take lactose tolerance, for example. That ability to digest milk as adults, that's relatively recent. A response to dairy farming.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what other cool examples of recent evolution are there?
Disease resistance is a big one. The presence of malaria, it's actually led to the sickle cell trait in some areas. Even though it can cause anemia, it's a trade-off that shows how strong natural selection can be.
What about our metabolism? Hasn't that changed with our diets? Especially with agriculture and everything.
Absolutely. Our bodies have had to adjust to new foods, new ways of processing food. Agriculture meant more starchy foods, right? That might be why we see changes in our genes that control carbohydrate metabolism.
Wow, so even something as basic as our food can be driving evolution. It's amazing how adaptable we are.
And it's not just the physical stuff either. Human culture, it plays a huge part in shaping our evolution too. Technology, medicine, social norms. It all affects our choices, our behaviors, which ultimately ties back into evolution.
Right. Like now that we have birth control, there's less pressure to have kids early. So even cultural progress can influence natural selection.
Exactly. It's the super interesting interplay between our genes and our environment that never stops shaping us.
It really makes you think about the future, Where are we headed? Will we keep evolving? Or have we hit some kind of endpoint?
Now there's a question that's been around forever. Impossible to say for sure, but one thing's certain. As long as things keep changing, as long as there are challenges, natural selection will keep doing its thing.
What about technology, though? Could all the advances in medicine, genetic engineering, could that change the course of human evolution?
It's possible, for sure. We're already seeing the early stages with things like genetic screening and gene editing. The question is, how will WE choose to use these tools? Will we try to improve ourselves? Or just focus on, getting rid of diseases?
That's a lot to unpack. But switching gears a bit here. We've talked a lot about the science of human evolution. But remember that big stack of research you gave us about meat? We haven't forgotten about that. We covered how it might have affected our brains and how we socialize. But it's more than just fuel for the body, right? It has this whole cultural weight to it.
You're absolutely right. Meat is more than just calories. It's a big part of our cultures, our traditions, our values even.
You're right. It's more than just calories. Like you said, it's tied up in our cultures, traditions, values.
It really is. We've seen how it might have been part of our brains developing, how we learn to be social. But it goes way beyond that. It's been a symbol for so long. Prosperity, celebration, status.
For sure. I mean, think about it. Pretty much every culture has some tradition with meat at the center. Holiday meals, barbecues, even just family recipes.
Exactly. And a lot of times those traditions, they're tapping into something deeper. Family ties, a sense of where you come from, even a connection to like the land itself.
It's amazing how food can be this window into history and culture. But okay, big picture time. We got to address the elephant in the room. Meat in the future. Climate change, animal welfare, how sustainable our food system, even IS. Where do we go from here?
The million-dollar question. Our relationship with meat, it's changing again, clearly. Plant-based stuff is getting bigger. Lab-grown meat is coming up. Could be a total food revolution, right?
It's like we're at this crossroads. Are we all going to be eating lab-grown steaks in the future? Will our grandkids look back at factory farming like we look at, I don't know, whaling or something?
It's interesting to think about. Lab-grown meat, it could be huge for the environment, for animal welfare. But then there's that cultural side. Will a lab-grown Thanksgiving turkey ever really feel the same?
Right. Will it even mean the same thing if it's not from an animal? What will our future dinner table look like?
Hard to say for sure. But one thing I know the future of meat, that's going to be a conversation starter for a long time. Innovation, debates, probably some arguments over dinner, too.
It just goes to show something as basic as meat, it can make us think about such huge questions. Our past, our present, the future. From those first steps as Sahelanthropus, all the way to wondering about the ethics of lab-grown meat. What a journey this has been.
It really has. Shows you the power of science, and how we're always trying to figure out where we fit into it all.
Totally. And who knows what's next for human evolution? What amazing discoveries are still out there?
The story is still being written.